The film began at GenSys, a pharmaceutical business specializing in genetic therapy. A female ape called as Bright Eyes by the staff has been given the medicine ALZ-112 and has demonstrated significant development. She is more friendly and peaceful than other apes, and she has completed the Towers of Hanoi puzzle in 20 moves, close to a perfect score of 15. Will Rodman meets with his supervisor, Steve Jacobs, and convinces him that he has enough data to move on with human trials for the drug. Rodman and Jacobs appear before the board of directors the following day in the GenSys conference room. Will says that the new medicine induces neurogenesis, or the formation of new brain cells, which does not normally occur after birth, and that it has the potential to treat a variety of degenerative brain conditions, such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. The only adverse effect of the medicine is that subjects exposed to it have a green shine in their eyes. Back in the lab, Robert Franklin, the senior monkey carer, is having difficulty enticing Bright Eyes out of her cage. She is aggressive with Robert and the other volunteers. They try to entice her out of the cage with orange soda, but when they try to wrangle her with a lasso pole, she bites them. She goes ape and runs rampant through the building. The chase ends when she crashes through the glass window of the conference room and the building's security guards kill her. Fearing that what they saw with Bright Eyes was a drug-induced violent adverse effect, Jacobs declares the drug experiment dead. Will tries to persuade Jacobs to reconsider his mind, but Jacobs refuses, claiming he wants the remaining test apes put down. When Robert returns to the lab, he shows Will a newborn ape hiding in Bright Eyes' cell. This explains why their presumption was incorrect. Bright Eyes was acting violently to defend her infant, not because of the medicine. Will is given the responsibility because Robert does not have the heart to put down the infant. He decides to take the infant home because he is unwilling to do so. Will returns to his hometown to live with his father, Charles. Charles suffers from Alzheimer's and needs care from a nurse when Will is not around. Will shows the baby ape to Charles, who soon takes a liking to it. Charles playfully calls the baby Caesar. Caesar quickly demonstrates remarkable development, being able to feed himself after only 2 days. He appears to have inherited the virus-based ALZ-112 from his mother. His temporary stay with Will lasts 3 years, and Will creates a place for him in the attic. Though ape-like in certain aspects, Caesar is a treasured member of the family and demonstrates considerable intelligence, articulating complicated thoughts with sign language. While Caesar is improving mentally, Charles's Alzheimer's disease is progressing and he has an argument with his nurse. Will takes a big risk by stealing ALZ-112 from GenSys. He gives Charles a dosage, and the next day, Will discovers his father seated at the piano, playing flawlessly. Meanwhile, Caesar has grown tired of seeing their neighbors play outdoors and escapes through the window into their neighbor's backyard. However, his arrival frightens the neighbor's girl, and her father, Hunsaker, strikes Caesar fiercely. Will and Charles manage to save Caesar, but not before Hunsaker injures him. Will smuggles Caesar into a zoo for medical care. Caroline Arana, a veterinarian there, treats Caesar. During the surgery, Caroline is impressed by Caesar's command of sign language. He even suggests that Will and Caroline go out to dinner. To satisfy Caesar's restlessness, they transport him across the Golden Gate Bridge to a redwood grove for some outdoor fun. When Caesar arrives in the woodland, he does not leave Will, but instead makes a supplication gesture of extending his arm, palm up, asking for permission to play. Will agrees, and Caesar climbs into the trees. Caroline is now a member of the Rodman family, and Caesar has grown up. Will has even begun to outfit him in a shirt and pants. A dog snarled viciously at Caesar on a visit to the forest, and he responds with a primal yell that scares it away. Will senses Caesar's sadness and confusion over who he is. They drive by GenSys, and Will tells Caesar about the medicine that made him smarter, as well as his mother's death. Charles's health has deteriorated in the 5 years since he was administered ALZ-112. Will believes that because his immune system has produced antibodies, a more aggressive virus is required. Will takes a risk by going to Jacobs, confessing his secret experiment with his father, and explains that the drug not only repairs cognitive damage, but makes people smarter. He says he has reworked the virus and needs Jacobs to approve new animal testing. Charles becomes disoriented at home and goes outdoors, into their neighbor's automobile. He tries to drive it, but he damages it. Hunsaker, the same neighbor who assaulted Caesar, yanks Charles from the automobile. In his insane state, Charles is unable to explain why he is there. Caesar observes this from his attic window and when he sees the neighbor cursing and aggressively pushing Charles, he runs out of the home. He assaults Hunsaker, tossing him to the ground, leaping on him, punching him, and ultimately chewing off a finger. "Caesar, no!" shouts Charles, recognizing Caesar. Caesar retreats and turns to Charles. Caesar is brought to a primate sanctuary by animal control as a result of the event. Will and Caroline walk him in and say goodbye. The sanctuary is difficult for Caesar in his early days. It is operated by John Landon, with animal care overseen by his short-tempered and aggressive son Dodge and a shy guy named Rodney. When Caesar hurls his food at Dodge and laughs, the young guy lashes out with a fire hose, driving a scared Caesar into a corner of his cage. When Caesar is released with the other animals into the main play area, he meets the group's dominant male, an ape named Rocket, who pulls off Caesar's shirt and beats him. Caesar also notices a gorilla named Buck in a confined cage, and an orangutan speaking sign language across from him. Maurice the Sanctuary sends 12 apes to Gen S-Wise to test the improved form of ALZ-112, known as ALZ-113. Will is in charge of the testing once more, and his first victim is a somewhat frazzled ape named Koba. Koba is restrained and administered the new medicine via a breathing mask. Koba, on the other hand, resists, and the hose falls off the machine, except for Robert, who is accidentally exposed. Almost everyone in the lab is wearing breathing masks. Will takes some of the ALZ-113 home that night to cure his father. Charles declines the medicine and dies in his sleep that night. After Will and Caroline pack up the remainder of Charles's belongings, Will's eyes fall on a copy of Julius Caesar. Dodge later leads several of his pals into the sanctuary's cage section, where Caesar steals a pocket knife from one of the guests. Caesar meets Buck, a big gorilla in the yard who is never let out of his cage, by letting him out. He then lets go of Rocket, who wanders into the yard. Caesar smacks him across the face with a steel gas can. Rocket is prepared to fight, but understands Buck is dedicated to Caesar and would protect him, so he surrenders. Caesar is currently the dominant male. Later, Caesar lets Rocket out of the cage area and enables him to distribute stolen cookies from Dodge to each monkey, bringing the group together. Caesar has also found a walkway and controls to the windowed enclosure at the top of the play area. Will returns to work to see that Jacobs has shamelessly and dangerously accelerated the research timeline. While Jacobs is preoccupied with economic gains, Wood tells him that the most pressing issue they must address is how the newer ALZ-113 would harm humanity. Will leaves Genesis as Jacobs refuses to listen to his concerns. Meanwhile, Robert has been suffering adverse effects from his virus exposure, such as sneezing that generates blood droplets from his sinuses. Will returns to the ape sanctuary and attempts to bribe John Landon into letting him have Caesar. John is willing to do so, but when Will coaxes Caesar to go with him, Caesar refuses. That evening, Caesar busts out through the window he found and goes back home. He steals ALZ-113 from Rodman's refrigerator and gives it to the apes at the preserve. The next day, John Landon observes the apes having something like a conference. The apes scatter, playing it off. Landon dismisses it as just something weird. That night, the apes are returning to their cages, but Caesar balks, confronting and defeating Dodge in the yard. When grabbed, Dodge says, "Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!" Caesar speaks, audibly, for the first time, shouting, "No!" The other caretaker is a witness and runs into the cage area, trying to rescue the now unconscious Dodge. The apes attack him, but Caesar calls them off, and in a show of mercy, puts him into Caesar's cage. Dodge tries to escape and gets killed. He is holding a cattle prod, and Caesar hits him with the fire hose. At dawn, Will calls to check on Caesar, but receives no answer. Driving over to investigate, he finds the facilities wrecked, the apes gone, and the ALZ-113 canisters open in the cage areas. He decides to raise the alarm. Meanwhile, the apes are making their way across town. Caesar divides them into two groups. Buck goes with one group to the zoo to liberate the apes there, while Caesar leads the second group to Gen S-Wise. Later on, a woman in Robert's building finds Robert dead. The news about the ape escape is relayed to Jacobs, who has just made his way to work. He finds that Caesar and the other apes have taken over the building and freed the 12 ALZ-113 test subject apes. The cops have been summoned. Jacobs boards a police helicopter as Caesar and Buck's groups join forces, bringing the total number of chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas to 50 to 60. The apes, on the other hand, appear to be deliberately averting the deaths of people they encounter. Will and Caroline had heard about the rampage, and after discovering that the apes are on their way to the Golden Gate Bridge, They believe Caesar is leading them to the Redwood Grove. The officers are on the bridge, ready to fire on the apes, but Caesar separates his forces once more. To get through the roadblock, one group climbs the suspension cables, while another swings from the structure's underbelly. In the chopper, Jacob spots Caesar and instructs the soldiers to aim at him, assuming that killing Caesar will put an end to the others. Buck, however, dives aboard the chopper as it approaches the bridge, bringing it down at the expense of his own life. Caesar is saddened by the death of his colleague, and soon discovers the wreckage of the helicopter hanging to the side of the bridge, with Jacobs crying for rescue. Instead, Caesar turns aside, and Koba rams the helicopter into the ocean, killing Jacobs. The apes continue into the jungle. Meanwhile, Will grabs a police vehicle and drives out into the woods. He yells Caesar's name, but is interrupted by one of his men. Caesar, on the other hand, emerges quickly, and the others retreat. Will tries to reconcile with his friend, vowing to protect him if Caesar comes home with him. Will is taken aback when Caesar holds him tight and whispers, "Caesar is home." Will observes Caesar and several other apes as they ascend into the trees to view the jungle and the world beyond. Will's neighbor Hunsaker reports for service as a pilot at San Francisco International Airport in the aftermath. He notices that he is bleeding from his nose as he gets to his plane. And this is the end of the video. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and support us with like and suggest a movie you would like to recap.